Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. So I finally completed my forgeworld Chaos Warhound Titan. Done to match with my Death Guard army and the Nurgle Knight army that you've been seeing on the channel if you've checked those other videos out. And this is kind of the size-wise culmination of the army. A lot more to do for the Force because I think I've said before, this is being built up to be a 10,000 point army to face an Imperial Warlord Titan sometime in August when we're going to do that big game with a group of mates. So although this is going to be the biggest figure in the army, there's a lot more to come in terms of to get that ready. So lots of nurglification to blend in with the Death Guard. Did make a few mistakes during this, so I'll talk about the mistakes as well as talking about what I've done well and how we've made it look like it looks. So the first thing was to magnetise the body together. I didn't do this in the build stage, just did it after the build stage in the end because I was contemplating gluing the torso together. Decided against that. Now just using the Dremel to drill a couple of holes and get some small magnets in and a large magnet in the top part of the torso. Now later on I do change this magnetising because I wanted to put a bigger magnet in because people kept messing with it and you know, it didn't quite all fall, you know, break, but it did fall off at one point and smack down onto the nose, and I thought, right, bigger magnet to make sure that doesn't happen. Now stage one, you see those pieces. Now what that is, that's blue stuff, and that's like a casting product you can get to take little casts off a model. So I've cast up the Glockkin. I've seen this in the previous video. It's in the Knight #1 video where I take these castings off a Glockkin model. So if you've not got blue stuff or a Glockkin to access, in a little bit you'll see how I've made nurgle pustules and things on this model that isn't out of this casting process, so you could do the same over the model. This is just a quick and easy way of getting pustules and musculature and all those kind of things off another model and making it match onto, in this case, the Titan. So, but if you don't want to do this section, you certainly don't have to, but it is a quick, easy way of kind of doing it. So I'm just carving down really the pieces of green stuff that I've made into smaller pieces to patch onto the model. The trick with the Chaos model I've found is there's so much detail across this Titan. It's almost finding areas that haven't got detail on to be able to customize it. In a way it would have been easier if I'd bought an Imperial Knight, because like Titan rather, because then actually there's more space for me to do the customization, but I wanted to customize it a little bit to blend it in with my Knight Force and make it my own, because otherwise it would just be a green painted Chaos Knight, but I wanted to make sure those nurgle elements are in there. So I've gone across the model and just picked little patches that look kind of right. Now on the nose here, there's a big crack on that nose plate of the Titan, which if you watch my build video, when I was reshaping it I managed to snap it because I didn't heat it up or anything. So really I'm sort of nurgling around the face to cover where I've broken it, and that's something that's actually really useful when you're doing nurgle, is you can cover up mistakes by pustules and making it manky. So I didn't want to use the spikes that you normally stick into the Knight on its torso, because really it's not a spiky army, my nurgle one so far. So I've just taken some little balls of green stuff and milliput that I've made in previous times when I've had some excess and stuck those into the holes where they'll be, and that will create the pustules. So here I've mixed up some milliput. So milliput's a two-part kind of epoxy putty type stuff. I'm using the black version. They're all basically the same apart from colours. I'm just mixing that up. Now firstly I've pushed it into the vents and everything to use some of the musculature that's been cast. You'll see that green piece there, and the rest of it is really to represent the demonic possession of the Titan. So I'm just putting it into random patches, smoothing it out so it's not overly bumpy, pushing in balls of milliput and green stuff to again represent those pustules. I'm using it in patterns of 3 because that's quite nurgly, and then going around and just sort of stabbing and messing about until the texture of this possessed areas looks kind of how I like. Now you could go for smooth, you could go for bumpy. I went kind of somewhere in between, just use the end of it to stab a few holes into the milliput, and I was quite happy. So once I've done that and that's all been allowed to kind of thoroughly dry, it's about now blending the green stuff patches into the model. So I'm just using some liquid green stuff, which is something that Games Workshop sells, and using an old manky brush to just kind of brush this onto the sides, because the green stuff will be like, you know, 1 millimetre raised or so from the actual panel of the Titan. So just go around and try to smooth it in so that this looks like it's growing out the Titan rather than just it looks like a piece of green stuff that's been plonked on. Then taking some of it as well and just painting that onto patches of the armour panels where it looks fairly smooth or just looks like there's nothing there, really just to give it a little bit of difference from what is already in place. And then while that was drying, it's time to start on the base. So this is just it's a kid's clock actually that I picked up from Hobbycraft because it was £3 in the sale. So it's a decent sized Titan base and should be fairly sturdy. And I'm just using a remains of a TT Combat building set that I've had. I've built a very big city fight board, modular one, and I've had some of these buildings left knocking around. I've used parts of them on various builds before. Very nice, very simple buildings, and I wanted it ruined. I don't want to have too much detail on the base that's going to take away from the Titan, but you need something on there because a big plain base will be a little bit boring with a model kind of this size. You can go crazy on bases this size. I just wanted it fairly plain. These are really nice kits, MDF, and it's kind of a grey board, I think this is called. Build it with PVA glue, cut it out. Obviously take your time on it, whatever. Don't rush too much, because what you don't want to do is build a model badly on the base of something massive, because then that will glaringly stand out that you've not taken any effort. But I didn't go to any crazy lengths to convert this or anything daft. I just literally put it on. And it's important as well to keep test fitting and things where it's going to go on the base to make sure it kind of, the Titan is going to fit. So yeah, that's it. I'm sure I'll do a bit more to it later. This is a mistake I do make, and I'll talk about this in a second. So the one piece I did do is that where the joints go in and the little pegs that hold it together go, it would have looked blatantly obvious it's not a real building. So again, just taking some of that liquid green stuff and just messing up some random parts of the building, putting some of the liquid green stuff on top of the broken wall sections and in various places, just to give it a little bit of texture so it doesn't look too flat, but not going in any crazy section. So now I've undercoated the model, black undercoat, leadbelcher over the top. I've said many times, especially for 40k and sci-fi type games, if you miss a section when you've undercoated in metal, it just looks like the paint's been bashed off in real life, and metal shows through, it looks great. So I'm taking a Citadel technical paint, Agrellan Earth, which is like a crackle medium, and just painting this on, again, random areas of the model. I am going around the areas where those green stuff patches I put on are, because if I've not quite blended it in right, we can do that, but also that then represents that these pustules have burst through the armour and it's cracking away from you know, where those are coming through. Also taking it on just areas that I think, right, there's not a lot of detail there, or oh, this will be a worthwhile place to do it, and putting it on. You could paint the entire model in this, but you know, I think it'll be a little bit too excessive. So while that's drying again, you'll notice a lot of stuff I do is whilst the other parts are drying. Keep yourself busy. If you've given yourself a couple of hours to do modelling, make sure you've got a couple of hours of stuff to do. So now I'm going to work on the rest of the base. Taking the milliput again, smoothing it out to a couple of mil, and taking a green stuff world roller to roll the texture and detail onto the base to make the cobblestones, again to blend in with my city fight board. Now I've done a big video on how to use green stuff world rollers, so I won't really talk about it here. Just go check that one out. Really great things, and again this is blending in with how I've done the bases on all my Death Guard and also my city fight board. And now just gluing the scenery down. You'll see before I drew round where the scenery was going so that I could put the milliput in the right place. And I can still see some of the lines, I know where it's going here. A little bit of PVA, probably didn't need this because the bulk of this model is actually going to be contacting the milliput, but then just sticking that down. So the idea is that the milliput sections is the city cobbled streets, and then obviously inside the building we'll just put some sand and things down. And again, test the Titan every time you put it down where it goes, and what I do is I press it in, draw around the feet. So again, I know where it is for the next part of this build, and that's important. Don't do stuff you're going to have to sort of reverse. Now where I've pressed it into the milliput, I'm now just carving that out to make a little hollow. Because when I stick it onto the base later, I'm going to use some milliput to really seal it on. And if you do that on the same level, it's going to be stood slightly proud, and I want it to kind of slightly not sink in, but blend in a little bit better. So now what I'm doing is taking, this is just polyfiller that I've bought from a DIY store, any polyfiller will do. I'm not going to go crazy with lots and lots of rubble on the ground, but I just want a little bit more depth, a little bit more texture than just having, you know, just the cobbles and some sand that we're going to do later. Now, you could put stanchions and bits of block and whatever, but for now I just want a fairly simple base, and I might come back to it and alter it later, which is fine. So the actual polyfillers had no time to dry, and I'm now starting on the next stage. The milliput by now is dry, so just be careful what you do, because what you don't want to do is the sand that I'm about to put on, you don't want to stick into the milliput, but if it sticks into the polyfiller, that's fine. So just PVA glue, and again, avoiding all those areas where the feet and the Titan feet are going to go. So you can see I've drawn that on there, so I'm not going to impede that in any way. And then just sticking on just his random play sand. Like I said before, I bought a 20 kilo bag of play sand when the kids were little, and I think I've been gradually chipping through it over the last sort of 10-12 years. So, you know, just simple sand, nothing more than that. Now it's starting the paint job. This paint job is exactly the same as I've done for my Death Guard. So if you've watched that video, you might want to skip through 60 seconds and just see. Well, really, it's the same process because I want them to match, you know, relatively exactly. Now I am using a fat-ended brush, and this is more of a stippling technique I'm going on here, because if you stipple on, it adds a little bit of extra texture. And you can see here, I'm being relatively precise, but if I miss little sections around the chaos symbology or whatever, it doesn't matter, because I said before, you're just leaving the metal showing. And I do paint over the crackle paint. Now, when you're painting over crackle paint, don't be over vigorous because it can come off. But obviously, if it comes off, it doesn't matter, you just paint over it or whatever. So now it's the metal colours. You could leave this just being the boltgun metal showing through, and that'll be fine, but I want to use the retributor armour again because it matches in the rest of the army. It gives an aged effect. And obviously Titans in the background are very kind of prestigious war machines, so they would use sort of different materials. Now on all the pustules and all the sunken areas of the model, I use an off skin tone colour, so Rakarth flesh. I'll put all the paints in the description down below so you can follow them exactly if you want, but obviously you'll just take it as inspiration. But I'm doing this to make the pustules look a bit real, but also I'm doing it in those sunken, cracked areas, so it looks like, there's demonic possession going on inside. And now cables and all those kind of things, I'm just taking a black colour, painting all the cables across the model black. You can, if you wanted, go to the nth degree, different coloured cables in the place, but I want to keep it again fairly sort of plain and simple. Pustules doing in a yellow. Now these will be covered in nurgles rot later on, but yellow's a really nice base colour to be putting down to put the nurgles rot and things over at the end. Musculature, which this casting, because it's again off the Glockin, this casting is, so the musculature colour sort of makes it pop a little bit from that Rakarth flesh kind of tone underneath. You could do the muscles in the yellow if you wanted as well, but I wanted it to look like, this thing was eventually going to be some sort of big demon prince kind of thing. If you've watched my knight videos, you'll know what I mean, because I did like 3 stages of demonic possession on a knight. The top of the head, I can never really work out what this is, but to me it looks like bone areas pushing through. So I've just taken a bone colour. I've already done it in the flesh colour, so I'll give a couple of tones on there. And then into the plasma coils, I've picked blue. I think there's lots of arguments about what plasma is. I'm not a fan of great big glowy plasma. It's not my thing. So just a fairly dark blue colour. We will touch it up later. Now normally I wouldn't show you highlighting stuff or undercoating stuff rather, because I find that a little dull. But I've just started experimenting with a battery powered airbrush. I've done a video on that kind of on the channel as well. So I just started to show the undercoating process. Now actually the undercoat spraying black was great, spraying the building colours, the off sand colour was great, and doing the tiles was great. And then I rather foolishly thought, oh, I'll spray on the wash that I like to use, and it went horribly wrong. So then I ended up resorting to a paintbrush to go over the top of it, thinking, oh, this will recover it, and I've effectively double washed the base. So I didn't go quite right, so it's about mistake. So was I foolish to experiment on a big model? Possibly, but you know what, experiments are experiments, aren't they? And talking about the wash, so the entire Titan has been washed with a Vallejo sepia wash. I had to do the underside of the torso first, all the legs, and then the following day to the top side of the torso. Here's me trying to rescue the base. So going back to the standard nice big fat dry brush, it's a very, very dark base. It took a number of layers to get back over it, because again, that's a double layer of wash. So don't be afraid to experiment. You can always rescue things, but maybe I was a little foolish experimenting on, the base of a Titan. Should have done something else, but look, hey, it kind of all worked out in the end, and I'm kind of nearly there. So just rescuing that, just dry brushing up through a number of browns for the base, again to match what I've done previously on the previous models. Now, it's a point here actually, the biggest difficulty I found when painting this Titan wasn't so much the paint job, because to be honest, the bigger models aren't that much harder to paint. They're not. They're actually easier in some ways, because you're not having to really get into niggly details. The thing I found the most difficult was the weight of the model, especially the top torso, when actually to physically hold it while you're painting it is really quite difficult. I ended up using a few pieces of foam from a figure case just underneath the torso most of the time, and just painting it while it was flat on the bench. But that's something to be aware of actually, is it's the physical manoeuvring of such a large model that can be difficult. Now once the wash is completely dried, now's the kind of highlight stage. Now I'm not using any different paints than I've already used, I'm using exactly the same techniques, but it's now making sure we're dry brushing over the top of all these. So I'm taking the paint out of the wet palette, putting it onto my sort of standard palette, and making sure we're going on very, very gently. So you'll see I'm doing lots and lots of brush strokes on every single area, because we want that paint to build up slowly. And what we're trying to do, the wash will leave patches where it goes a bit streaky and whatever. You're trying to dull those down if that's happened, but I have left some showing through actually, because for nurgle it really works. And then doing the same process on every single other colour. So slowly building up the flesh colour in those areas, slowly building up the greens or the brass or the other colours we've used, because what you don't want to do is just paint it straight on. We want some of this wash to show through. We want the dirty stages to show through, because this looks like you're kind of highlighting. Again, something I've talked about and done on most of my other Death Guard related videos, so an incredibly similar paint scheme. Now I was going to leave the actual ends of the guns completely black and just let the wash do its thing, but I thought put a couple of little bits on, it looks all right. But you can see here just painting through. Now the only bits I did actually paint rather than dry brush was the pustules and the gun barrels and things there, because dry brushing onto these at this stage would have probably made you the dry brush yellow onto the actual metals and the paintwork. So dry brushing for the greens, the brasses, whatever, and then coming on to your pipe work, onto your pustules, onto your plasma coils and stuff, that's just painting that on. You can see a simple highlight now with a wet brush. It's not, we're not actually edge highlight or anything, just on those coils to give them a little bit of colour, but I'm not doing that kind of object source lighting everyone seems to love doing with plasma, because I personally don't like it. I may experiment with it at some point, but I'm not a huge fan. Now, it's now time to finish off the flesh, and I like a nice bruised kind of look at the flesh. I really love on this model actually all these little weird fleshy parts that are growing on the various sections. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a contrast paint of Magos purple, and I'm not painting it over every area. It's kind of spotting it into some of the fleshy parts just to give a different colour and tone. So what this will do is make the flesh look a bit bruised, which you'll have seen some on the shots earlier, and you can see here on the plasma gun side the cracked effect, some of the shadow showing through, and then this kind of bruising area. Now these vehicles are 10-20,000 years old, so actually a really nice technical paint is that nihilakh oxide to make a rusty brass, because brass obviously doesn't rust, it oxidizes, so it's quite a nice blue one. You have to be careful about how much you put on. I did find a number of times I put stuff on and go, oh, that's too much, and take some off with the brush, but just dot it on in random sections across the model until you're happy with how much you've got on there. I'd probably maybe not even 5% of the brass areas get it on it, so it's fairly small, but I tend to do it around bolts, the nuts, any kind of pointed part of the arrows, that kind of thing, and it just kind of looks quite nice. Now nurgles rot, obviously it's a nurgle army, you couldn't do any nurgle army without nurgles rot. Painting it onto all the pustules, but also all these cracked and damaged areas where it looks like maybe the demonic possession will leak out. Tend to do it at the bottom of the cracks and holes so it looks like it's running out, and then just paint it down in the streaks. But it's a brilliant paint, this one, really kind of evocative of that kind of nurgly possession. Final stage, a rust wash. So we've done the sepia wash over the entire model, but I wanted to take some onto just the metallic areas and kind of go over maybe where the sepia wash has left it streaky, but also just to give again some more tones. You notice I haven't gone over the metal areas with a metallic colour, so they've been left just with those wash areas. Now you can take this rust wash just to give it just some real extra kind of colours and make it look particularly manky, and it's very kind of, it tones all well together from the armour into the metal, but also it gives sort of differences as well. Now here's where I realised I've messed up. If you've watched my how I do my nurgle bases videos, you'll see that I always do little bubbly pops in the pools. So what these are on the base here is just pools of nurgles rot. This is first layer, I ended up doing a second layer, and I realised I've not put any of my customary bubbles. Now all these are is just milliput or green stuff rolled into a little ball, and you can cut the bottom off, stick it on the floor, and it looks like there's kind of, this nurgles rot is kind of popping in the pool. But I realised I've not done it, very frustrating, so I just glue a few on and then paint them black and yellow, and then we catch back up in the process. So that is the model complete. I hope my rambling made some kind of sense. I think it looks really nice. I said before, there was a few mistakes in that build. There are also a couple of areas in this model where I've looked deep into the cracks and gaps and realised you can still see bare resin, so I'm going to have to go around and fix that. You can't see it on the video because they're really kind of tucked away. Slight disappointments, but again, that's my tendency to build complete models rather than build them in sections, and obviously you can miss bits, and I did miss a few bits on this, but again, it's manipulating the large model. But I'm really happy with the build. I think it really blends in well with my nurgle army. It's going to look really cracking when it's on the board together with the entire army, so hope you enjoyed that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Check the links out below, and I'll see you in another video.